Just to finish this model up. So this model says that people experience symptoms. The abbreviation for symptoms that you'll see in this class is SX. And we went over some of those in the last segment of the tape. And the symptoms tend to hang together in certain ways for many people. And when they do, and one group is different than another, they're given a name of a diagnosis. And a diagnosis is, the term you'll see is DX for diagnosis. And the DSM, whichever version starting from the 3, is the rule book of converting patterns of symptoms into diagnoses. And now on this side you have etiology, which means cause, abbreviated sometimes ET, sometimes HX for history. So these etiologies could be biological, psychological, social. These could be things like going through a divorce. These could be things like poverty. These could be things like out of cortisol, a biological stress hormone. These could be just, for a given individual, there's hundreds if not thousands of potential etiologies, but they do tend to fall into realms of biology, psychology, ways of thinking, ways of feeling, and social issues like, again, lack of opportunity, poverty, prejudice, stuff like that. Now I've also added in parentheses spiritual, because if you are a person who is very much involved in 12-step programs, it is accepted to view the etiology of the symptoms of addiction as being a spiritually related issue in terms of a relationship with higher power. So it's not part of this model, but it's in there, spiritual. So etiology, biopsychosocial / spiritual. And then on this other side, we have treatment plan and the treatment. The treatment plan, the abbreviation is RX, prescription, RX, treatment plan. And the treatment, the abbreviation is TX for the treatment. And there's treatments. And guess what? Treatments could also be biological, primarily, medications, or exercise, or an herbal type of food or change in diet. They could be biological, they could be psychological, expression of emotions, negative thoughts and feelings that are turned inward, assertiveness skills, the whole grieving, the whole variety of psychological treatments. And treatments can also be social, creating new opportunities for a client that they didn't know were there for them, that they always wanted to be on a boat and go out and be a fisherman, and helping them see that niche is possible, and help them learn the steps to access that part of society. So treatment plans, the treatment plan, the prescription, and the treatment can be bio, psychosocial, and or spiritual if we're talking 12-step programs in the recovery community. So this is the biopsychosocial model that is used in this class and is used as we think about diagnosis and the DSMs. So let's see. The last piece is, again, we have the DSM-4 and the DSM-5, which I guess I threw down there. And during this class, there are going to be certain things that we're going to point out that help you differentiate the 4 from the 5. But I just want to show you one quick thing that differentiates the 4 from the 5. I have to find, if I get lucky, I'm going to find a blank sheet of paper here, or somewhat blank. Thought I had one here. And we'll go where we started here. Okay, hopefully you can see this. The DSM-4 and the DSM-5. Now, one of the differences, and they're both being used now in 2015, is that the DSM-4, it's a Roman numeral, but starting with the 5, it's an actual numerical number, 5. And the reason that is because they want to go digital, and so there'll be a 5.1, a 5.2, and you don't generally do that with Roman numerals. So that's one of the differences. One of the primary differences that you're going to discover if and when you go out and work in the world is that the DSM-4 has the diagnoses, the same types of diagnoses. There are a few new different diagnoses in the 5, and we'll be covering those. But the 4 divides the diagnoses into what are called axes. They have 5 axes. Pardon me, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what they do is they say, if the person has a mental disorder like depression, put that on axis 1. On axis 2, if they have a long-standing personality disorder that's been around for years and years and years, we're going to put that on something called axis 2. Medical disorders that play into their psychological disorders, we'll put that on axis 3. Stressors in the world, we're going to put on axis 4. And impairment in functioning, we're going to put on axis 5. So the DSM-4 has what's called a multi-axial system. And if you work out there right now, or you go out there to start your traineeship in 6 months from now, it's likely when you see the paperwork on a client, you're going to see these 5 axes of diagnoses: the mental disorder, the personality disorder, the medical disorder, the stressor, and the functioning. The DSM-5 got rid of these diagnoses, these axes, the diagnoses. The DSM-5 just lists the diagnoses, and the rule is more listing them in the importance of treatment. So if the stressor disorder is the most important, you would list that first. And if the medical is key, you would list that maybe second. Then if this could be listed third, the depression or anxiety, because that's the third in terms of what clinicians need to know about. So the DSM-5 said, rather than having to be stuck with these different categories of diagnosis, we want to increase what's called clinical utility and put them in the order of need for the client. And so there are good things about it and bad things about it. One of the bad things about it is that when you had these different axes, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, it forced the clinician, it forced us to always think about, well, what medical issues are in play that we should know about? What about long-standing personality traits? So it helped us, prompted us to think about these different domains of symptoms and diagnoses. But in the 5, we're not prompted to do that. We have to do that on our own. So right now, you're going to be, primarily studying the book that doesn't prompt you into these different axes, but I've assigned some reading for you out of, again, the old textbook that explains how these axes work. Again, because they're still in play. The United States has been given basically till the end of 2015 to convert everything into the DSM-5, and we'll see if that happens. And one thing I think it's important to know is that once we convert into the DSM-5, there's a whole different set of codes for the disorders, and they're the same as the United Nations World Health Organization. So part of this process of shifting DSMs has been moving towards a global agreement on the criteria and the coding that's used for various disorders. So interestingly, in the DSM-5, for every diagnosis, you're going to see a code that's the old DSM-4 code and a code that's the new DSM-5 code. So there are 2 sets of codes in the DSM-5. They anticipated there'd be this 2 years of confusion. So hopefully this doesn't confuse you too much. But know that what's in play for most people right now is still the DSM-4 code, and soon it'll be those DSM-5. The second code that you'll see if you open up your DSM-5, you'll see 2 codes. One way to differentiate them, most of the DSM-4 codes start with numbers, most of the DSM-5 codes start with letters. But so that's just, you got to kind of bear with it that you're in this unusual time, and I'll do everything I can, and I know my colleagues will too, to not create more difficulty for you. But at the same time, we want you to be prepared to go out there and succeed in clinical settings where you may see DSM-4 structure. At the same time that you'll see DSM-5 structure and coding.